The presenters each have...
So sorry about that.
The presenters each have 2 minutes. Thanks, Mo. The presenters each have 2 minutes to give a short pitch. We're assuming that everyone has read or looked at the videos, read papers where the papers were posted. And then we can immediately get into a discussion. I see Filippo is here. I see Afia is here. I don't see Ruth Marumba yet, and I don't see Annalena Oppel either. Am I missing somebody? No. Okay. Well, I think we're going to just get started because we really are. We only have 40 minutes, as you know. We have, if you've looked at the papers, in principle, we've got 4 presentations. 3 are local case studies. Filippo and co-authors from Western Uganda, Ruth Marumba from Nairobi, and Afia, who's with us from Ghana. And we have the 4th paper, Annalena Oppels, is preliminary looking at some South African survey public opinion data nationally. Filippo, can we start with you, please? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, we sure can. I apologize in advance if there will be any connection problems. I'm right now in fieldwork, so I'm relying on mobile connection. But yeah, so good morning, everyone. For those it's morning, indeed. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present at this wonderful conference. Our presentation, entitled "Follow the Hand That Feeds You: The Effects of Non-Governmental Cash Transfers on Citizenship," addresses by analyzing the impacts of a universal and conditional cash transfer program carried out in a rural Ugandan village. The under-researched topic of social assistance provided by non-state actors. The focus on how they might affect governmental legitimate patterns of citizenship in general. But in order to the perceptions of the state-citizen relations, and understanding of rights and responsibilities. And we then adopted a mixed methodology for impact assessment, including matching techniques and social network analysis. To the best of our knowledge, it is the first time that the latter has been applied in the context of cash transfer programs impact evaluation. Our results partially confirm the research hypothesis, whereby the NGOs legitimacy benefit from the transfer, whereas there was an unclear finding as regards state-citizen interactions. We found an increase in interaction between citizen and service delivery officials. And finally, most importantly, nevertheless, the interaction between citizens and local leaders were heavily affected by the program, given the finding that an NGO-related actor progressively centralized and later monopolized the villagers' calls for positive change, previously mostly directed at local politicians. So in light of these results, the thought-provoking question we would like to pose is, should governments put a limit to non-state provision of cash transfer programs? So thank you very much for your attention and for the precious insights you will provide us with.
Thank you, Filippo. I'm hoping most people caught most of what you said, although the connection was not great. Afia, over to you. 2 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you again for this opportunity to share my work and hopefully get some feedback. So the paper that I'm presenting is an extract from my dissertation, which broadly examines the impact of the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty program in Ghana. So as far as debates on whether to have conditional cash transfers or unconditional cash transfers go, Ghana kind of straddles the line by imposing co-responsibilities, which are not exactly monitored as a way of making sure citizens are doing what they're supposed to do. So my work explores how cash transfer conditionalities represent a contract between states and citizens, where both sides are supposed to collaborate towards the achievement of program objectives, as opposed to a typical top-down approach, just the state implementing a program. So my study finds that due to inefficiencies in the implementation, where some citizens are not even aware of what their responsibilities are, and a lack of ability or willingness by beneficiaries to hold the state responsible due to perceptions of transfers as gifts, as opposed to a rights-based framing. The LEAP program is not leading to improvements in state-citizen relations as you would expect. So my question, I guess, is tied to the conditionality piece, that is there room for state-citizen relations to be strengthened through some unique iteration of conditionalities, whether they would be imposed or not imposed, whether they would be enforced or not enforced? Is there room in some iteration of this implementation feature that can improve state-citizen relations going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Afia. Ruth, you've joined us. You have 2 minutes, Ruth. You'll need to unmute yourself, please.
Okay, thank you so much. I do not know if I'll be able to do it. I have a bit of a cold. So my work is actually also something I extracted from my thesis. And I'm looking at my work in an informal settlement and the lived experiences of young people in as far as this social protection program, the Kazi Mtaani program, where they go out and they carry out various activities in their community. So I'm looking at that, and the findings of my research actually bring out quite clearly that it's both got some benefits and also some problems because of the fact that it's quite restrictive and quite short-term in its basis, because over time you find that the project cycle has breaks, and in between those breaks is when a lot of those young people end up having nothing to do, and there's a problem again with how they will survive. And then the project again has not really had a sustainable benefits in their communities, because most of those problems that they were trying to deal with, whether it's about sanitation, water, garbage, still remain quite prominent in their community. So in the end, the question I would like to pose today is, how do we work around the whole issue of projects having the life cycle, and how do we extend their work to be more sustainable for informal settlement communities? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So it looks like we've only got 3 presenters. Annalena is having problems connecting, I believe. So we've got 3 papers that are all actually local case studies, one from Uganda, one from Nairobi, and one from Ghana. And we've already got some questions on the agenda to discuss. I'd like to just throw out 2 comments or questions really to all 3 presenters. The first is the question that I asked in the previous session. What can we say about the specificity or the generalizability of your local case studies? Right? Are there good reasons for you to believe? Is there evidence that you can present? Is there secondary literature that you can refer to, which might help us to understand whether this particular village in Uganda, this particular informal settlement in Nairobi, this particular district in Ghana are in any sense similar or different to other parts of those countries or other parts of the region? So that's the first question. It's very important for us to try and at least reflect on the generalizability of our case studies. And the second question or comment really refers to these concepts of citizenship and legitimacy, and especially infrastructural power, which are widely used in these papers. I'm a bit worried that we're all at risk of setting up our African case studies by comparison with a rather ideal type of the West of the European experience, a kind of an ideal type Weberian state, right? And then showing all of the ways in which our state-citizen relations in our different case studies are measure up against this ideal Weberian state. And are we really using? I mean, can we go beyond a sort of a very Eurocentric conception of citizenship and an infrastructural power and try and push the boundaries a bit more by thinking more about actually not what's not present in our case studies, but what is present in our case studies, and how the relations between citizens and the state are variously understood in local terms rather than in terms of what they're not doing. So those are kind of two challenges, two provocations. Let's open it up for general discussion. Would any of the presenters like to come back? Otherwise, people, please put your hand up. Filippo, Afia, Ruth, would you like to respond at this point? Ruth, the table is yours, Ruth.
Okay, thank you. In my work, I think I'm trying also to respond to your question, to go beyond that Eurocentric idea of who a citizen is, because in my work in the slums, in the informal settlements, I find that people need a better explanation of how people see them as citizens, or how they should understand themselves as citizens, which now brings me to someone called Schindler and his work on Southern urbanism. And the idea, like now what is happening in Nairobi, we have a lot of infrastructural development taking part. I don't know if it's development, but a lot of infrastructural change. There are a lot of roads and things like that, that is causing a lot of social upheaval. So how do people now who live in informal settlements feel that they are citizens, and yet how they live is perceived as being below par, and they are not able to really protect what is theirs, even if someone says they're living on way leaves and things like that. So I think the thing is, how do we define people as citizens of not just the country, because the country is something that was a creation of someone else, but in the place where they live, how are they able to exercise their citizenship? Because the whole program that I'm talking about, again, Kazi Mtaani, is a creation of the idea that COVID has happened and we need to find a way to actively engage these young people in a way, excuse me, they're able to make a living without causing disruption. But did someone ask them if that was sufficient for them as a way to mitigate the circumstances they're in because of COVID-19 and even before COVID-19? So I think it still raises some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. I suggest let's go to Filippo and Natalie, and then we'll come back to you, Victor. I haven't forgotten you. Filippo, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Professor Seekins. I think that these are very relevant questions in our case. And actually, the two of them are quite related to each other. And I think that in discussing about them, I would start from the idea that the context where we are looking at is a context where people feel more, identify more as members of the local community rather than as Ugandans, and there are specific characteristics of the setting, like the decentralized Ugandan political context, and a high level of and a micro level program. So like barely, I would say, generalizable in time or space to other settings. I think that the discussion around how it could be generalizable also starts from the fact that we find negative effects, and needs to start from acknowledging what cash transfers do, what money does to people agency and relations with the state. I think that in general, it will be a positive effect if the surrounding even microeconomic level and settings does not change as much. It will have expectable effects on people, and particularly in Uganda, where the state is not as present in a decentralized way. Yes, we're quite in line with what we would have expected from the literature.
Thanks, Filippo. Natalie Hufford.
Yes, good afternoon. So I would like to add to what Filippo just mentioned. So because I was involved, in fact, in the same research, long-term research, which is a follow-up of previous research we have been doing in the same context. So in terms of generalizability, I think it's clear that indeed our study has a higher internal validity than external validity. So this is also related, I think, to the topic of our research, on which there is not really a lot of secondary literature. So it's looking at the impact of a cash transfer program that is done by an NGO, so a non-governmental actor, on state government legitimacy, relationships between citizens and the state. So this is a kind of research topic on which there is indeed not so much secondary literature that is already there that could back up our findings. And so I think that our study, the contribution is more that it fills a gap in the research rather than it is immediately generalizable to a setting beyond the one we have been doing research on. And adding to this is also the fact that we have used social network analysis. So if you use social network analysis, then you are in fact, this link to the method, you need to have specific boundaries of the network you're looking at. So it means that our sample is also not a very large sample, which is in fact linked to the method that we have been using. So I think that our contribution is mainly a theoretical contribution, probably also a methodological contribution, but in terms of generalizability, I think there is need for more research that could replicate what we have been doing. So this is how I would like to respond to your first question.
Thank you very much. Victor Ogoranduku, would you like to come in now? And then after you, we'll go to Afia.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, very fine. I just wanted to respond briefly to the question you just posed now. And I think that in terms of generalizability, there is some form of generalizability amongst the studies, because I think some of the studies that were presented here, there have been some other studies that have looked around state-society relations and social protection. And when you talk about the relationship between citizen and the state, there is some evidence that social protection doesn't really so much impact this relationship on the positive side. It also has a negative side. For example, I did a study 4 years ago that looked at that. And one thing you find is that the context plays a very strong role. The context in which social protection programs are being implemented in African countries plays a very strong role in determining the relationship between the state and citizen. For example, take the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, where there was quite a decade of some social protection programs. For over a decade, it really didn't change state-society relationship in the region, because the issues that created the crisis were far deeper than issues of citizenship. And that links to what Filippo said, which is one thing that happens, is that the fact that in Africa, citizens tend to they tend to share that identity more with their immediate community than the larger nation. So when you go to a region, people tend to see themselves in that region as more closely connected and a bit distant from the state itself. So there is that distance, which makes it difficult to, really see how state-citizens relationship really plays out. And one other thing you have to understand when it comes to defining the citizen in Africa is that a lot of very tight cultural norms and practices really shape how citizens see themselves and the state. I tend to, I have this opinion that there is still an ongoing conflict, a very subtle ongoing conflict between the state and the citizen in defining what and who is a citizen, and the state embracing its responsibilities to the citizens. So there is still that very subtle conflict. And in terms of social protection now, why you don't see a major change in state-society relationship also, it's an outcome of studies I've been looking at, is the fact that social protection programs are mostly supply-side interventions. The elites come up with these programs, implement these programs, big NGOs come with this program, implement this program. They aren't really drawn from the demands of the citizens. So they're not driven by citizens' demand. The citizens don't really demand these social protection programs. They just brought to them. So that, that context shapes state-citizen relationship, because since they don't demand it, it doesn't really change the relationship they previously have. So I will just leave it there for now, and as the discussion goes, I'll make more inputs. Thank you.
Right. Great. Thank you very much, Victor. I mean, Victor's, I think, raising very fundamental questions here about the consequentiality or the significance, the scale of any changes to citizen-state relations that might follow from social protection programs. And then also, are they really rooted in citizen perceptions, experiences at all? Afia, over to you. You're muted, Afia.
Yes. So yeah, thank you for the questions, especially the part about whether we are imposing a Eurocentric model of states and citizenship in African context. I think that is something that we can think of. I'm not sure I have like a specific answer to that, but it's definitely an issue worth thinking about. I think that that is why I think Ghana's treatment of conditionalities in particular is interesting, because in other contexts, like I'm talking about Brazil, Mexico, like these programs have been implemented with clear conditionalities, which are monitored for compliance and such. I think that Ghana's use of co-responsibilities alone is an acknowledgement that certain models or certain implementation features of cash transfer programs would probably not work in the local context, but then still trying to see if they could achieve the effects that supposedly come from the imposition of those conditions. I also want to just quickly touch on what Victor said about the complexity of defining citizenship in the African context when you factor in unique cultures, ethnicities, ethnic identities, which are very much prominent and very much part of how people define themselves, particularly whilst on the continent or in their countries. Outside the continent, definitions of who we are and citizenship kind of change a bit. But I think that in Ghana, political patronage also has a big role in how the state-citizen relations play out, particularly when it comes to the appreciation of social protection and the programs that are being implemented. The LEAP program in particular is unique because it's been able to survive several changes in government. And so it's not necessarily tied to a particular political party and what they can and cannot do. But even then, my research on the field clearly shows that when a particular party is in power, then beneficiaries kind of associate the program with them and think that they are the ones providing those benefits and see it that way, as opposed to looking at it as a benefit from the state and what the state is doing with them as citizens. So I'll probably leave that there. The question of generalizability of the results, I think that my study, the results are probably not as generalizable outside the unique context that is being looked at, because Ghana's use of conditionalities is somewhat unique, at least in the literature that I've looked at. Ghana treats it a little differently, but I think that exploring the use of conditions versus no conditions, that part is quite useful across all contexts. And so what my study can contribute is at least present one case of how the use of conditions can be modified based on a particular context. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
So I mean, you might be right to say that the kinds of conditionalities that you write about for LEAP are unusual, but a very large number of social protection programs across Africa are highly conditional. And they're conditional on work through workfare programs. So I mean, and there's obviously there's a large literature on work conditionality, which is crucial. I want to throw at all three of you a question which Kate would ask. I'm not sure Kate's with us again for today, Kate Bruce. In the first session, Kate sketched the paper she's writing really on the sort of the gendered nature of the importance of having a gendered analysis of citizen-state relations with respect to social protection. I think I'm right in saying that your presentations are pretty silent on the relevance of gender, right? So for the two of you that did qualitative studies, that's Ruth and Afia, did you find any difference between the men and women in your qualitative samples? And for Filippo and Natalie, was gender, well, a broader question. I mean, you look at the overall statistical significance of the relationships you're testing, but within your sample, were there any obvious variation by gender or any other of the respondent characteristics? Who would like to have a go at that? Those questions.
I can take a stab.
Do you want to come back in?
Yes. So yes, I do look at gendered impacts, but not for this particular paper. I think that for this field study, just based on the characteristics of the beneficiaries that I ended up talking to, gender was not so much a factor, just because I ended up speaking for the community that I was in. Most of the beneficiaries were enrolled in the program because they were old, and by and large, they tended to be men. So I didn't end up exploring much of that impact, but there's another beneficiary group where it's women, pregnant or lactating mothers who have no access to any form of support. And yes, for those beneficiaries, it does tend to have an additional, they are burdened by having to fulfill whatever conditionalities are imposed on them. And when I was talking about Ghana's treatment of conditionalities, so for the elderly with no form of support or the disabled, there are no conditions imposed. But for pregnant or lactating mothers and kids of school-going age, then there are conditions imposed. So yes, there really is a gendered impact of that, so that in addition to fulfilling whatever responsibilities women already have, then the then it somewhat becomes their sole responsibility, because they are now receiving funds which are tied to certain behaviors to be able to take the kids to school, to take the kids to the clinic for immunizations and such. So yes, even though I don't explore it in this paper, I do look at that in my larger work.
Natalie, and then Ruth, if you'd come back in after Natalie.
Okay, yes, thank you. I think my answer goes very much in the same line as our study also is part of a much larger study on unconditional cash transfers impact on different dimensions, including also sustainability effects after the cash transfer has ended. So, and one of the things we also want to specifically focus on in the larger study is indeed also on gendered impacts, because the setup of the study is like this, that the women also receive the money for the kids. So which means in fact that the cash transfer that women receive is in fact larger than the cash transfer that the men receive. And so we have been looking at a gender differentiated effect on investment, on savings, on also agency empowerment, and also on the network structures. So looking also, for instance, whether women become more central in networks, in the village networks, support networks, also not only networks that link, because now in this paper we focus on the network between the individual and the duty bearer, so what we call linking social capital. But in the larger study, we also look at social capital in terms of social support. And so whether in fact due to the cash transfer, which is unconditional, which is also quite important when you look at gendered impacts. And so that in fact the support networks might also change. So becoming more diversified, women having a more central position in the support network than they previously had. So we see this very well, we see these gendered effects, but as the previous presenter was discussing, also not, in fact, we do not include that dimension in this specific paper, because there were already so many other things to discuss, all these different indicators of citizenship, so that in fact there was no room to also go into these gendered effects. But there are clearly substantial gendered effects.
We'll come to you in a moment, Ruth, but Maria, you've got a comment or a question?
No, I just wanted to add to this. I do think when it comes to gender, it is not just on the gendered impact. So assuming the program is targeting women and then is it helping them or not? What is the much more, what I'm trying to preach among UNICEF colleagues as well, is it is much more about the hidden impacts. So to what extent does the enrollment of a program add to the work burden, thereby implicitly not validating their care work? I mean, this is much prone in a lot of African countries, thereby not validating the childcare work and the care work at home of those women, simply by just adding on to this. And that is to some extent also, I mean, drawing on Tara Cookson's work from Latin America, which can then, which is very much applicable, especially for like conditional cash transfers in those cases in Africa, Ethiopia, Ghana to some extent, and so on. And there are also those precisely not, I mean, invisible impacts, which means essentially that if women are not included in those programs, because the focus is on old people, on people with disabilities, it essentially also means that their care work is not validated. The time they are using on caring work or unpaid work is precisely pushed out of the consciousness of people, that this is something that should actually, where they should be considered deserving of receiving cash or any type of support for doing this work. But ultimately, this is then also something that is, I mean, coming back to the transformative nature, changing these dimensions and changing these underpinning beliefs of deservingness is something that is necessarily of transformative nature, where people's minds need to change about who to value and who not to value as deserving and not. So these are the things that I wanted to add on the gendered nature of these programs, how to take them account, is looking at the hidden impacts, but also on the invisible ones if programs are not targeted women.
Thank you very much, Maria. Ruth, would you like to come in at this point? This will be your last chance, I think.
Okay, thank you. So looking at, okay, if there's a gender effect there, I would say there is, but probably not. I've not discussed it in my paper, but because of the patriarchal nature of the society, so you would find that there are more men than women who end up taking part in these programs, as well as the fact that they're quite physical. It would involve a lot of physical work that sometimes maybe the people running the programs would prefer to have young men doing it rather than young women. So the proportion of young women to young men is lower because of the kind of work that they would do, and also how the social norms of the community affect the choices they make in the people they want to include in the programs. Of course, that one it always comes into play if you're talking about such an issue in the informal settlement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I don't know if any of the presenters have got a final thought they'd want to come in on. Afia, Filippo, otherwise, Marianne, over to you.
It's a very brief question to Afia around the conditionalities that you talk about co-responsibility, but I'm still wondering whether, in being a bit critical about how we look at the state citizens and from some of the other points brought up, whether these conditionalities are still not defined from the top in any case. So it sort of speaks a little bit to Victor's point around social protection not being citizen demanded. And so my question is also, even if there are co-responsibilities, it still sounds like to me that they're defined from above, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. So I would just like to hear if you could maybe clarify that for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, they are still, you can probably cynically say that the Ghanaian government tried to use a framing that instead of just clearly saying that there are conditions, they decided to use language that kind of softens it up by saying co-responsibilities, so that it sounds like it came from dialogue. That could be the more cynical framing of it. But I think that definitely the conditions, whatever they are called, it was definitely part of the design of the program. There was no input from the beneficiaries as to what those are going to be. The only thing I'd like to add is that, for instance, for the beneficiaries for whom there are no conditions, it's a perfect UCT. It's elderly people who have no other support, who then get to benefit from very meager sums, but it makes a difference. It helps them to be able to meet their basic needs. So for those people, they can find no fault with the program because there are no potentially detrimental impacts for their involvement. However, going back to the gendered, the hidden gendered impact of it, for the beneficiaries who have these co-responsibilities, which, as you rightly point out, are quite top-down, then they end up having to fulfill whatever responsibilities come with it, and in some instances end up doing more than they were doing before being part of the program, but they're not necessarily getting a commensurate benefit from it. So yes, it's framed as co-responsibilities, and it represents an attempt to kind of not have the typical imposition of you do this before you get this benefit, but it still has a bit of ways to go to really be kind of a partnership that effectively takes in the citizen part of it and tries to improve the program that way.
Thank you, Afia. I feel that we're just beginning to get going on this conversation and our time is up. So I hope that we will have a further opportunity to share some ideas. Those of you whose papers are here because you're submitting to the special issue of the prospective special issue of social policy administration, we will be getting back to you about when we're expecting the revised papers and what the process will be henceforth. I don't know if Marianne or Alicia or Sophie, you want to say anything just to wrap up at this point?
Just around the special issue, I did send out an email yesterday about a deadline 1st of September for the next version to those of you that's relevant for. Yeah. Oh,
sorry. I'm afraid, Marianne, I can't get you de-spammed, so I have to go. I missed your email. Sorry about that.
No worries. I heard the rest got it. So.
Thank you very much to the presenters. I think these case studies, both the quantitative and the qualitative ones, are very, very fruitful. I do think that you're all going to need to, to consider in more detail give us a bit more information about the context you're writing about, because it's quite clear that local studies, different studies are coming up with some quite different findings, and so we obviously want to try and make some sense of why a finding in one setting is not mirrored in another setting, and I'm sure the answers are fairly obvious, but we'll probably need to have some more specificity about local conditions. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to the audience as well. I think that is the end of the session.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.